Okay, it's time to look at adding a virtual machine to Oracle, so to Oracle's VM VirtualBox Manager. I've still got quite a few VMs sort of listed here, and that has a sort of a negative effect on your disk storage. So I've got my solid state drive running at the top here, and it's a terabyte, but it's only down to 64 gigabytes. And that's due to the fact I've got a large number of VMs running here. Now, I'm running them on a SSD because that's where I'm going to get the best performance. I got a bit of space. I'm waiting for my next terabytes worth of storage to move some of those VMs onto, and that's what we're waiting for in order to improve speed for those. So we'll do that at another time. So here we've got 64 gigabytes, so I can at least add another VM, can't I? And that's exactly what I'm going to do. So if I have a look back on the manager, and as I say, I've got quite a few in here. I've got quite a few Linux ones in here. There's a puppy in there, so a lightweight version. I've got some compute and storage node to network and controller from OpenStack. An IP PBX and another one at the bottom here, which is PBX in a flash. There's DNS in there somewhere. There's a whole variety of Windows XP, Windows 7, Windows 10, and a variety of Linuxes from Red Hat through CentOS and Ubuntu. Ubuntu is the one I prefer, so that's the one we're going to have a little play with now. So we're going to create a new one. We're going to call it my new Ubuntu, just for the hell of it. It's going to be Linux. There are choices, but we're going to stick with Linux. Linux 64-bit would be nice if it will work. And that depends on your host machine and its capabilities through acceleration as much as anything else. There's a relatively large storage, although we've got a green line here that takes us up to the max we can allocate here. So we'll just bring it up in increments. 2 gigs, that's fair enough for a simple machine. Now we're going to create a hard disk now. We could just and wait in abeyance, or use an existing one that we've created otherwise, and we just need to take that body and plumb a new head on it. So we're going to go to create. There's 3 formats that we've got available to us. VDI, which is sort of Oracle's native variety. VMDK at the bottom we can also use, but that's really for VMware. And in fact, if you want to export this as a VM, then you'd export it out in a VMDK format, as opposed to within VirtualBox to do some of the management such as resizing. I'd have to have it in a VDI format. So what I find myself doing from time to time is cloning from one type to the other. So you're actually copying across, cloning, but creating a new disk format, which means then you have this artifact left behind, which is the old disk format, which of course you need to go away and delete. So here we go. We've got VDI is probably the best one to go with, just in case we need to resize. Remember, that might be something I want to do in the future. So dynamically allocated versus fixed. You can see it's fixed. It takes longer to create, but it will operate faster. But I'm going for dynamic nonetheless. And 10 gigs is the sort of default size. You'll notice here I've got a name here, which is the disk name. I'm just going to drop that back to sort of Ubuntu 1, so it reinforces the disk name, and the VM name could well be different. And I've got an amount of storage that I could take this up to, but remember I'm limited, so I'll keep it at 10. So that's created it. Well, it's created what? Well, it's created a set of settings which reflect some of the things that I've just told it, such as if I look in the system settings, I can see that I've set 2 gigs worth of memory. 1 CPU, I could increase the number of CPU that this VM will actually use, and then I can look at the acceleration techniques as well. I might not be interested in floppy, but I'd be interested in the hard disk. I'd be interested in the optical, probably optical more so to begin with, and come around and change that order, the boot order effectively, adding and removing the devices as required. Display settings, if it's going to be a GUI, then I suggest we put that up as much as we can, at least 64 megabytes, and then think about acceleration techniques for this. which you can again come back and change those dependent upon the distribution that obviously you're going to be putting in there. Now the storage, which is interesting because this is the hard disk that I've just created, which only has 2 megabytes worth of the 10 gigabytes used, because I haven't got an operating system yet. I haven't put one on. I've just created that sort of almost like the equivalent of the bare metal, but of course in a virtual world. So it's the virtual resources, the sort of workload associated with this VM. So there's an empty optical drive sitting there as well. Okay, so that's sitting. That's I'm going to need to populate that with something as I would do with a normal physical machine. So I'm going to virtually insert a suitable image, an ISO, into that. But of course I need to go away and find one to put in there. Come back and do some of the audio settings, serial ports, USBs, depending upon, you may have to download some additional extension files in order to support some of the extended capabilities. Shared folders is always of interest, but for that to actually work I need to add in the guest edition so I can come back and modify that. Back to network. Network's going to be very important for any device. You have to decide how you're going to attach it, either to the outside world or how you're going to attach it sort of across any one of these interfaces. NATing and bridging out to the outside world, not attached, which you may need if you're going to virtualize through GNS3 and you want to import those in as VMs into that. Host only, so you might be doing some testing internally within the actual Oracle environment. The virtual environment that it creates is over its own sort of open virtual switch, and generic drives, particularly if you want to do tunneling. We'll look at those network options on another video. You can add in a number of adapters to that mix, and one of the important things is to make sure that they're active. The adapter type may be of interest to you, and you may have to default that back to sort of PCNet Fast 3. Or you may actually pick up one of the Intel options. That's a game of fiddle and test and see how it works for you. Cable connected or not connected, that's an excellent way of adding something to your virtual environment or taking it away. It is literally like putting the cable in and unplugging it. So you can have all your settings set, but you miss the fact that the cable's plugged in or not. So click on the advanced, expand that so you can see what's happening with the cable. The other thing of interest down here is the MAC address, and I can actually change that MAC address. So I can actually cycle through and I can keep changing that, creating a different MAC address. So if I'm engaging with DHCP, or indeed if I'm engaging with any other device that of course uses ARP, they're going to want to find an IP address, and the IP address is going to be associated with a MAC address. So if you're creating VMs, there's a very real chance you could create a VM with the same MAC address as another VM, and that's particularly true if you're cloning, so copying, in which case you will, unless you've reset the MAC address, and this is one way to do that. It's also an excellent way of testing, of course, because you can go back and keep changing this and ask for an IP address and ask for an IP address, or maybe you shouldn't. So these are some of the things that we've set. Another point of interest perhaps is also up here on this is the sort of general settings that we've got, or preferences. And if we have a look at the network settings down here, we can see how many host-only adapters we've got. So that this will allow a number of VMs to port using one of these host-only adapters. So if you need more, come back and add another host-only adapter. Just click and wait. You'll get prompted. So when you get this prompt, obviously yes is the response. And that builds quite quickly. So there it is. That's the next one, number 4, and that will allow us then to, of course, have 4 devices essentially associated with host-only ports. So, of course, if they're dormant, as most of these VMs now are, in fact, I think all of those VMs are. Indeed, they're all off, as a powered off state indicates. And indeed, our target one here is as well. Or indeed, going back to storage, of course, the storage has the Ubuntu 1 name with the VDI format at the end. Remember, not much of it used so far. Okay, good. So what we need to do now, of course, is get him started. But before we do that, we need an image to work with. So we can go and trundle around the internet, and of course we can go and Google and find Ubuntu releases. I did a quick search for Ubuntu server and I saw this was like the third option down that came up for the Xenial Xeros, and I've got here options for desktop images or server images, and I can download 64-bit images or 32-bit images. So if you want a sort of standalone server without a GUI interface, then use the server installs. If you want, and then you can SSH into those. If you want a desktop GUI, then desktop's the one to go for. And again, 32 or 64. Now we said we were going to go 64, didn't we? So I'd literally click on here, and that would download. As you can see, I've actually downloaded all 4 at the bottom here anyway. So I've got all 4 images available for me. Each of those images, of course, is taking up valuable disk space, so perhaps not a good idea. So that was in my downloads folder. I've actually moved those across so that I can go and find those. And in fact, I've put them into a disk image folder in my libraries. So I click on here, I can see that I've downloaded those 4. We can see the AMD64, which is the 64-bit images for the desktops, and then for the server. And we can see the i386, which is the 32-bit images for the desktop and the server. Good. So at least I know where they are. Okay, so it's just a case of going and finding those and bringing those into life. So that's what I need to do. So if I go back into the storage options for the highlighted VM, and I can see that this disk is empty, by clicking on it, I reveal this to the right-hand side, and if I click on this disk image, it's on the little tab there, you'll notice I can then go away and choose. It might pick one of the ones I've been playing around with, or choose hard disk. So if I literally click across into my libraries, into disk images, and pick one of those images. Now we said desktop, and we said 64-bit. Okay, so 2 CPUs and 2 gigs should be all right. He says hopefully. So this is the option that we've got now. That's the same as just sliding that CD/DVD into that optical drive. So we're ready to start. So let's click OK and then start. You could right click on the actual item and start from here instead. So we can actually see that loading. We can see a summary of that up here in the preview alongside the settings. Otherwise, like a picture in picture that. Beautiful. So if we max size this, we can see what's going on. Now you'll notice that I've maximized that up, but the screen res hasn't gone with it, and that's because we've got the basic drivers, and if we want the enhanced drivers, that's where we need the guest editions. So we'll be adding those guest editions in later. Now you'll notice here this as it stands gives me a reasonable resolution. It's just if I need to expand upon that. So let's see what we've got. Well, we've got an option to sort of live CD this and try it all out, but of course we've also got the option to install, which is the one that we want, and I've made sure that English is the selected language. Download updates while installing Ubuntu is always a good idea, and installing third-party software for graphics and the like is also a good idea done here. Again, if you're going to be graphical and play those sorts of things. If not, don't get them until you need them. They'll probably come down as dependencies anyway when you're installing new apps. This will make the whole install process a lot slower overall, but hey ho, let's go. We can use the magic of the pause button anyway. So next question is erase disk and install Ubuntu. Now this was one of those questions that left me crying for a little while the first time I tried this. I think it was the emotion and the panic. Until I suddenly realized, hang on, when we're talking about disk drive, it's that 10 gigabytes that we've reserved, which is essentially a large file that's going to be available to us on our host machine. Well, let's just have a look and see what we've created so far. So if I go into the VMs directory and I go sort of looking for this beastie, then if you remember the sort of title we had for this was My New Ubuntu. Each one of these folders represents a VM. So if I click into this, what I can see is I can see the VDI. This is the actual hard disk space, if you like, for my VM, because it's all virtualized. There's a configuration file that's here and a backup of that configuration file. That's the backup. That's the one that I'm interested in. If I open that with WordPad, what you'll actually see is you'll see a text file which is being created by VirtualBox, and this actually pulls in and identifies the format of this, and this will actually go through, and you can see things in here like, we've set the memory size here. Yeah, this is the boot order. Okay, so we got the CPU count. This is all of the configuration information that's in settings is stored in here. It even tells us where to go and find our particular, we've got particular types of controllers, and that will build all the way down in terms of down to the actual drive as well. Right, so just looking at the file system, I've got the storage controller here, which is referring to that SATA drive. If we go back up, we should be able to see. In fact, one of the quickest ways to find these things, particularly when the files become unwieldy, there's the actual drive itself. So that's quite useful. And you'll notice it has this. That's its unique ID for that drive. So let's take that. Let's do a Control F and a Control V to paste that in and find the next one, and we go down and we find that in fact it actually is that device, the SATA drive that we've got here. So that's one of the same. So we can see this whole file here is describing the resources. Very, very useful, of course. Very, very useful. Yes, I have edited those in the past, but that's done with extreme caution, because of course that should be something that the Oracle itself is managing through the manager. Okay, so we can see we've got a paltry amount of used disk space down here, and that's what we're going to fill in. Another folder that will be created alongside this is when you start to do snapshots. So when you start to do those restore points within your drives. We'll do that on another day, but very, very interesting there. So, okay, the erase disk and install Ubuntu is not so daunting now, because it's that VDI that we're talking about that's going to be erased and made available. So let's go. Let's do the install. So it says to continue. Okay, that's just another little warning. Then my time zone is correct. My language is correct. Looks like we get through this. My name is Ray of the Castle. It's not, but that'll do. And my password is very secret. It would be if it was a bit longer and a bit better, well constructed. But hey ho, this is for the purposes of test only. And away we go. So options in terms of login as well. A few useful tips and hints as you normally get to while away the time as it's working away in the background doing stuff. Right, let's let it do some stuff and we'll come back, because there's nothing else to click or fizzle bang with at the moment really. We shall let it do that automatically. So to go through this, copying files, then of course it'll go through the installation of those files. There'll be a few things flashing across the bottom. At the top here you can just go back and have another look at some of the stuff, some of the infomercials about what you can do, which is very, very good when you consider what Linux can do for you today. One point of interest whilst we're sort of messing about is go and have a look at that disk. There you go, the VDI. It's growing. It's growing. There's something happening. And we know the maximum size that can go up to is 10G. It's at 4G now. Dum, dum, dum. Let's hope we left some space. It's installing the systems now, so we'll let it do that. Okay, it's just doing a few more fizzes and bangs. And again, I say, we'll let that carry on until it comes up to the next prompt. There we go. So he's back with us. Now, if we have a look on the manager and we look against the individual machine, what we should see in storage, of course, is that we've still got that disk in place. So the thing to do, the optical disk. So what we need to do is go and remove that. So that's now empty. Okay. Then we can go back to the VM. this is just a sort of natural precaution. It should ask you to do that anyway, but I have found on some systems it doesn't bother to ask, then it goes back and tries booting off the optical drive, the virtual optical drive, I grant you, but optical drive nonetheless. And again, I suppose that's reinforced by the boot order, which is something else we should go and change as well. So it's going through the restart procedure, the reboot. So we'll let it do that and come back to it when it's got something to ask us to do. It's always worrying when you get a black screen, but not to worry. And here it is. We hope. In all its glory, so our super secret password. Away we go. So Ubuntu 16.4. Long-term solution, so there it be. Ooh. Nice. So, some of the things we're going to have a look at. So if we bring up a terminal, and we can see in here, let's do /opt, nothing in there. Right, interesting. So under machine and session information, here we go. We can see it's got a release of 5.1.6. Now, if we have a look at our manager here and go into help and about VirtualBox, we can see this is 5.1.22. This is it. This is the version it should be. So in the case of our VM, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to install guest editions. Now that will give us access to things like the clipboard. It'll also give us access to drag and drop, set bidirectional as well. It will also allow us maybe a better resolution on the screens, depending on what the drivers have got initially. You can see it had a set of guest editions, but they're an old version. It'll also support things like shared folders. So shared folders would give us access to the host machine. So just simply click on the add, come into the folder path, pick on other, unless there's one there to select, and then go away and find where you want to do this. And I've usually got one on the C drive, and I've usually got it here. Yeah, VBox share, there it is. So that's the one I can sort of build in every time, and I can make that available so we can copy files across more easily. Of course, you could do that through, a file server with wget and the likes, which I do as well. So particularly if I download distributions, I keep them on a FTP server and I can go get them. So there's a couple of different ways we can share information around. So as I said, one of the things we really need to do here is we need to put in the guest editions, just to square things off quite nicely. So if I insert the guest edition CD image into here, what that should happen is, because we're in a GUI environment, you notice how the CD pops in, so it sort of auto comes in, and then we can see we've got this option, so it's also running. So we can click on run. We'll need to authenticate ourselves because obviously we're installing, so it raises up to super user. So using the password that I've just put in, and you can see that it goes in. It's 5.1.22 is what it's trying to install. Because we give it super user access, it should do that. You can also perform this if you chose the server options as opposed to the desktop options, but with the server options, there's likely what you'll be doing there is SSH in, so secure shell sessions in, and then once you're in, you'll be doing that to command line. So we got a video on that as well. So there we go. So press return to close the window, and that should, or has it, session information 5.1.6. Of course, it will take a reboot, and then that information will change. So it is something that we could do here. Of course, we'll need to sudo in order to be able to do that. We want it to reboot, and we want to do it now. So again, because we want to do something that requires elevated permissions, we need to put in the appropriate password, and away we go. So, with the right sort of resources, these things will run, sweet as a nut, they'll run much more quick. The XP machines will run a lot better here. And I suppose it's because we've got better processors now, and also we've got access to things like solid state drives, which we didn't have in the old days of XP. So if I pull that in, just come in, just logging on. If I go back up to machine and session information, yep, I can see it's changed to 5.1.22. And if I pull up the terminal, let's have a look at that folder, see if we've got anything in there. There it is, 5.1.22. Exactly what we expected. So we're quite capable now of installing elements on our bright new Ubuntu. So one of the things I might like to do is I might like to build a test environment that I can look at things like OpenFlow and SDN. And to that end, I'll bring in Mininet. Not on this video, perhaps on the next video.